most other people seem to be here, so we can jump straight in. So Condorcet, be great really just to kick off relatively high level and just kind of give the background of what Bribe is.
Absolutely. Thank you everyone for joining and waiting for us to get started here. Let me introduce things very quickly at a high level. Bribe is a governance protocol that pays DAO token holders to govern. Obviously, everyone on this call probably has seen, held, transacted in governance tokens for some kind of DeFi protocol. What we don't tend to actually do with those tokens, though, is vote. And if you look at a DAO like Aave, where we're doing our first integration, typically participation numbers in quite literally the dozens of wallets, fewer than 100 different people or organizations participating in sort of DAO governance and decision making. It is a feature of governance in DeFi right now that I think we're all fairly familiar with. It's one that is alive and well in Bribe itself, kind of founding teams, early insiders tend to, even if they don't control a majority of token supply, they tend to at least be the leaders and decision makers in a protocol. And the question of how we evolve the space to the point where these insiders can actually hand over power to a truly decentralized DAO, we're still really at the point where we're trying to figure that out. And so really what Bribe is doing, it emerges on the scene now when we have good case studies for what decentralized government should really look like. Places like Aave with staked Aave, Maker, Yearn with the Y-Team model, Curve with V-Curve staking. There are plenty of kind of novel use cases for voting and governance tokens that are starting to emerge. So we like to think that we're coming at a really good time and learning from the best efforts that are already out there to expand this model of incentivized governance and get voters paid, across the DeFi ecosystem.
Definitely. No, thank you for that. Yeah. And I mean, from a very basic level, it just means governance token holders now actually earn yield on this, right? Which is a huge step to actually increasing this participation. I've seen the word, the phrase voter extractable value being mentioned a few times. So maybe you could just touch upon that and kind of the narrative around that.
When you say it, it sounds so obvious, right? That we should get yield on our governance tokens even as we are voting with them. I would add to that, it's almost a right of a voter, you would think, to be able to vote and contribute to governance without paying exorbitant gas fees, which is something that organizations like Snapshot work to solve, which is extremely important work. But exactly, Bribe's contribution to this solution is voter extractable value. It's kind of our name for the MVP product, which we'll be launching later this month. Voter extractable value is meant, of course, to recall terms like miner extractable value that have risen in the space. In my personal opinion, to kind of to do justice to a narrative or to a feature in blockchain ecosystems, validators, miners that need to be compensated. A feature which, even though it may not be ideal, it is a reality of the world that we live in. So while we can continue to have the conversation in the ivory tower, if you will, about whether bribery in governance is correct, about whether, more fundamentally, governance token-based voting is the direction that we want to go. But Bribe's not here to make those kinds of decisions for you. What we recognize, what we accept, is that voter extractable value is real. It is a powerful feature of governance ecosystems today. And rather than talk about bribery, in a hushed corner, let's embrace the fact that voting does have value, that the work and attention that people put into governance has value, and that if nobody's translating that into yield at the end of the day, well, that sounds like a huge missed opportunity.
Definitely. Yeah. And to me, that's the most exciting thing about Bribe as well, right? That the token holders obviously get the yield and benefit out of this, but also just adds this another layer of transparency that we just don't have, right? So on that note, I'd love to sort of hear kind of your opinion of how Bribe fits into the current sort of governance landscape and, the narrative of all of this liquidity wars with Curve and Toke. I mean, it's obviously like the hot topic in general. So I think it's perfect time for Bribe to sort of enter this. So yeah, it'd be great to kind of hear your view on how Bribe has a seat in all of this.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's get into the tech. I mean, I think that this is a great question. Specifically, how are we accomplishing kind of all of these high level, all of these high level goals? How are we accomplishing it with one product? And yeah, that's really the beauty of what we've built. So let's get into it. I would say that the ecosystem right now around bribery, around the idea of governance marketplaces, is certainly most alive and well in Curve. It's kind of the news cycle of the moment. It's attracted a lot of value over time. Many people think to literally like all the way down to the CRV governance token, in addition to creating a bunch of like really recent, very high TVL, very effective protocols kind of built on top of this ecosystem. So bribery is most alive and well in Curve, I would argue, because Curve has a very effective and high value utility essentially associated to voting and its governance token. So because the utility that Curve provides is brought about via voting, this ecosystem became an immediate candidate for the explosion of bribery. So I would say that this is condition one. Really important, really high demand utility associated with voting in the governance token, not just use of the governance token, but voting with the governance token. And the reason that ultimately this became so this is kind of condition number one to specify for anyone who may be kind of following. That utility, by the way, is the Curve gauges, of course. So if a protocol can get lots of votes onto its Curve gauge, then that protocol essentially has access to deeper, more sustainable liquidity for any like supported or relevant tokens. So it's this very important utility for protocols that essentially is driving the governance conversation in the first place. Now, jumping over to condition number two, what I really think has made Curve the place where this activity has exploded first. Obviously, the TVL, the fact that Curve is Curve doesn't hurt. But I think that the second condition was actually that this is a liquid governance market, if you will, in that every governance token, essentially every vote on Curve, every vCurve vote, represents an outcome. A vote which is used to incentivize a vCurve gauge does not need to be part of a coalition. It does not need to be part of a winning side. It does not need to be used or staked in any kind of fancy way. It's very simple for a retail audience to get, for a broad audience, let me say, to get quick exposure to the actual benefits of holding the voting token. To hammer this point home, because this being the second condition, this liquid governance market where one token, equals one vote equals one outcome. To hammer home why this is crucially important, let's look at Aave as a comparable example. Aave similarly provides a potential utility via its governance. That utility is, can be a few different things. It can be a grant, it can be a partnership. In the way that's most comparable to Curve, it can also be adding a collateral type onto Aave, as this is also, this also serves as a utility to an external protocol. However, with Aave, if a protocol wants to integrate, wants to kind of go through governance to have a collateral type added, it doesn't just need one vote in the right place in the right time. To have any outcome whatsoever, it needs to accumulate at least 51% of the active vote, something more along the lines of 100 to 100, or I'm sorry, 50 to $100 million worth of Aave. So the crucial difference, explaining why this activity has emerged in Curve first is, of course, the TVL and attention of the protocol, the sheer amount of utility that it generates through governance. But also the fact that that utility is liquid. And I'm not necessarily even saying that that liquid governance is necessarily, archetypal of DeFi 2.0, that it's necessarily the right direction, or that the only important decisions on Aave or that use V-curve votes are liquidity directing decisions, essentially. Governance has other uses. However, in this particular case, so much attention, such wide participation, such an open framework for participation was created due to the liquid governance market. Is that making sense?
Yeah, definitely. No, and that's super interesting, and I think gives the context of kind of where we're at with governance in general at the moment. So I think kind of to add on to that, it would be great to hear how Bribe specifically then fits in with that. Like maybe if you could put Bribe in the context of an Aave proposal or, the curve gauges, like it'd be great to hear it in that sense.
Exactly. So Bribe emerges, on the scene where we are exactly thinking about how to extend this curve framework beyond Curve to protocols like Aave. And the answer is as simple as you would probably think. What we do is create a liquid governance market by aggregating voters who previously would not have voted into large coalitions, which now can actually kind of have some authority in bringing about governance outcomes. Specifically, what does that mean? Well, let's say, again, I'm a protocol. I'm looking for additional utility, additional use cases or sources of liquidity for my token. So I essentially have a choice, right? I can pursue a curve gauge. I create a curve pool, try to get, either bribe or purchase CRV and try to, drive incentives to my pool. Or I can pursue a partnership and try to get my token listed as a collateral type on Aave. Not competing utilities, obviously, but comparable to a certain extent. So what I can do now so obviously, in the status quo, I have to go to Curve. It's open, it's more accessible, unless I, happen to know the Aave team or have, some really compelling reason and go through governance and that works out for me. Now there will be a price tag associated with the proposal on Bribe. And again, like you were highlighting, Marmite, bringing some transparency to this market is a huge part of what Bribe seeks to do. Since protocols, they go through this process. We've experienced it ourselves. You go through this kind of ad hoc process on a day-to-day basis, bootstrapping liquidity, bootstrapping partnerships and integrations. And to a certain extent, my argument is that as a space, DeFi gets more accessible with more liquid governance markets that look like Curve. That if not today, one day can be major decision makers when it comes to important things like protocol partnerships, like how protocols handle risk. Our vision is not that we would start by adjudicating these kinds of decisions. On Aave, we think specifically about collateral types. Whereas Aave will soon have a separate risk DAO that can essentially help to inform and make decisions around how those collateral types should be treated from a risk perspective. Simply getting them added in the first place, hosting a competitive market so that Aave voters know that it is the protocol that can bring the most value, that can get the best capitalized, that is the most committed, for the long run. It is that protocol that is going to capture the bribe pool, because they have to put their money where their mouth is.
Definitely. No, it's super interesting. And yeah, like I say, like for me, that's why, Bribe is so bullish just as a protocol, because it has such a perfect fit in the current, DeFi environment, right? Users are now able to get yield on tokens that they don't really have any other opportunities for. And now protocols or whales can essentially buy votes in a decentralized and transparent way, right? Like you say, right? It's almost seems too obvious to be true. So I think Bribe's coming at such a perfect time. So maybe like touch on kind of the use of the Bribe token itself in all of this. Like I think for users, it's kind of relatively clear in the sense that they're depositing their governance tokens in the Bribe pool. And obviously the protocols or the whales or whoever comes in to bribe this pool. So maybe just touch on kind of the tokenomics of Bribe itself and how that fits into the equation.
Absolutely. Yeah, the token for us is an extremely important part of this growth narrative of extending the framework, of liquid governance markets from the curve wars external to the curve ecosystem. What's important for us is essentially two things. One is that we can incentivize a community of actors that is really good at the specifics of implementing a good bribe pool. There essentially needs to be some kind of utility attached to holding bribe that can compensate and incentivize these these sophisticated actors. These are essentially the miners of Bribe, if you will. And maybe there needs to be another MVEV for that, but we'll play around with that one. But these are essentially the miners of Bribe, the folks who have the context, the technical know-how, and kind of the background to actually be experts in how we implement new bribe pools. This is extremely important because Bribe, at the end of the day, kind of the thing that goes unsaid, which is so obvious that we made it our name, is that governance markets do represent, the potential to enact outcomes that actually aren't net positive for the entire community. And it is Bribe's job to make sure that we own the association, that we own the problem, and that we bribe well, so that at the end of the day, there truly is a market optimal outcome, which we believe there always should be. So it is essentially, this decentralized community of highly incentivized experts that hold bribe that we want to be empowered through the token. So, obviously plug for the LBP if this is kind of a role that you eventually, one day see yourself playing. This is your opportunity to get in early and right to have a permanent seat at the table. So the second kind of major component of how we use the token and essentially explains the incentivization framework is by staking it into particular bribe pools. And the reason that this is or kind of the second feature of the token is that it is staked into particular bribe pools. And the reason that this is important is that while there will be a benefit kind of across integrations of Bribe, there will be benefit that's accrued to the token, for any given pool is effectively going to, go into buybacks, into compensating Bribe stakers, so on and so forth. the actual the actual revenue that a bribe staker will be getting will be associated with a single pool. So kind of similarly to how we wanted to incentivize this cross section of actors who are really good at using bribe, we additionally want to incentivize actors to always commit to a single pool, be that the Aave bribe pool, the Tokamak bribe pool, or another bribe pool that's coming down the line. We have plenty of integrations in the works. We do want actors to ultimately remain voters and incentivized parties in their particular DAO environment. If you're an Aave bribe user, your primary association, we admit, should probably be Aave. So the token needs to accomplish, both of these things. Both kind of giving a cross-sectional, incentive to bribe holders who are just really good at bribing across pools, while also providing a staking opportunity on a pool-specific basis. That's essentially, how the token economics have been structured to enable the growth that we need in the coming year.
Yeah, awesome. No, that sounds great. And then to kind of now jump into some more alpha, perhaps you could kind of go into specifically like the next proposal that Bribe will look at, to kind of use that in the context of then, what role will Bribe play in that? What can it, actually help facilitate that isn't possible without Bribe? I think that would be really useful.
Absolutely. Yeah. This might be the first real alpha of the call. So
it's a good time to drop alpha.
so let's start dropping it. Yeah. So the proposal that we've just submitted is to add MIM, Abracadabra stablecoin, as a collateral type on Aave. Now, implications should be like relatively clear based on the introduction that I just gave. Aave actually also just announced, like within the past 24 hours, that they want to start participating in the curve wars. So what essentially the last 24 hours has introduced has been a stitching together of Aave with the rest of the curve ecosystem via these two mechanisms. Aave governance, first of all, will have, its first big new actor in a while, I would imagine, which will be the bribe pool. And, we've done the work to form partnerships to identify, investors who are bringing lots of value to that Aave pool early on. So it's something to watch because, obviously we'll be, starting off very quickly. And this will become a new actor, which can potentially facilitate additional integrations with the curve wars via the proper Aave DAO. So if you have Aave, this becomes like immediately actually your first opportunity, something to be super excited about, to actually benefit from exposure on Bribe. By the time the proposal goes to vote, the Bribe application will be launched. So this will be happening over the next couple of weeks. Watch the proposal, watch our Twitter. We'll keep you informed each step of the way.
No, that's perfect alpha to start on. I'm sure the Frog Nation will love that. But yeah, and for me, that's kind of like the most beautiful example to show why Bribe is so valuable, right? Our staked Aave holders now have this opportunity to earn the yield, and MIM can now leverage this to actually be listed as collateral on Aave, which is obviously huge, right? And I think it just goes to show like the such perfect fit of Bribe within this whole ecosystem. And just to add that Brainjar has now joined us. So hello, sir. Brainjar, obviously our resident GigaBrain. It'd be great to hear, Brainjar, maybe your thoughts around Bribe and the value it adds in the current DeFi space, and obviously as it's a protocol within the composable ecosystem as well.
Hello, sirs.
Hello.
Welcome.
Yeah, so I've just also wanted just to touch on a couple of things. So I think um, just from our perspective, like why Bribe is super important to us. I think the strategy that Bribe has right now with this initial Aave proposal is fantastic because it illustrates, on a very fundamental level, like if we're able to get a significant amount of bribing activity for this proposal to onboard MIM as collateral on Aave, which honestly, should have uh, should be a little bit controversial given that it's pretty much the stable coin that's like, versus that's combating the suits. So it should be an interesting situation to view. But I think this really introduces the conversation that governance is broken and governance requires transparency and protocols like Bribe to ensure that decentralized governance actually remains decentralized and not cartelized. And I think, this is something I'm super excited. As we mentioned yesterday in our alpha leaks, just generally introducing the curve wars on Kusama and Polkadot and having Bribe play an important part in this is also very important. We didn't sort of touch on it in too much depth, but we are setting up a sort of gauge-like structure on Polkadot and Kusama for liquidity directing and allocations and incentives. And so I think this will be a very exciting use case of Bribe as well within the Dotsama ecosystem. And then lastly, just another thing on a more sort of like fundamental level, cross-chain governance is obviously a big problem. And one of the things I've been noticing in the space is that there's a necessity for there to be a generalized protocol that any protocol can plug into. Like as protocols are becoming multi-chain, there's emerging this problem, like just DAO issues with managing things on different chains, and like L1 tokens are managing multiple different protocol instances. And so right now, cross-chain governance is very much so a unsolved problem, but also a problem that, if solved, really takes the ecosystem forward. And this particularly is what the composable team is focused on in collaboration with Bribe. So yeah, I just wanted to hop in and just say all that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, since you've mentioned that, like, I think we've given quite clear context of Bribe and, the first proposals, etc. is going to tackle. So maybe like just touch on perhaps how Bribe will interact with our, chains such as Picasso, in the sense of it being a palette and how that will actually look.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, basically, like the way I see it is it's kind of like a phased extractable value concept that Condorcet has introduced, which is really getting people to realize, oh, okay, like, voting actually really matters for like a lot of things, considering everything is quote unquote run by decentralized governance. And so establishing VEV as a primitive gets people to start to notice what's going on with governance and why it's broken, and hopefully as a whole increasing participation in the governance process. That's kind of like phase one. Phase two, I see Bribe becoming a primitive that ends up playing an important part in liquidity directing, as Condorcet has posted about with regards to the tokamak liquidity wars. And I think we'll see a huge market emerge that Bribe should be able to capture the majority of, regarding trying to become a kingmaker in this space for protocols that want liquidity from the tokamak core event. And then I think phase three really is then extending this progress and the tooling that Bribe has made on a very practical level to then solving bigger, and like, I mean, those problems are obviously already huge, but almost like insurmountable problems, which are this cross-chain governance concept, deploying on Picasso as a palette, and starting to build a bribing ecosystem across the ecosystems that we're tapping into through Composable. So yeah, I think for us, like, this Bribe is a very important economic primitive that becomes the way that all of the incentives and stuff like that that will be flowing through the Composable ecosystem, having these things not only get but also informed by what Bribe is like like the outputs of Bribe. This then becomes a very important financial primitive and economic primitive for Composable as a whole, but also the broader space.
Definitely. No, that's super interesting. And yeah, it's funny that even after the call yesterday, we still have some alpha to be leaked, right? But yeah, like, for people wondering how Bribe fits in within Picasso and what we're doing there, I mean, obviously with what we revealed yesterday with the chaos and the treasury design, I mean, that's going to be a significant war chest of liquidity and incentives, right? So yeah, we plan on using Bribe to pretty much facilitate, the gouge concept around that. So Condorcet, like, I think we've been speaking of Bribe in kind of its, fundamental concept on ETH and kind of the initial proposals, etc. there. So it'd be great to kind of hear your thoughts of how it fits in within like a cross-chain world as well, especially in the context of Composable being this large cross-chain, cross-layer ecosystem.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think what's really valuable to pull out of all of this is that voter extractable value is really just the start. I mean, we felt that bringing VEV to the table was an important enough starting point for the protocol that we named the protocol Bribe. Of course, the core of what we do is get people paid for their role as voters and governors. However, there are a number of essentially like tool sets that we're deploying on the path to a DAO 2.0 framework, essentially. And a couple of these, and while VEV is certainly the foundation, as you and Brainjar have called out, there's a couple of these new concepts that we're going to be piloting actually in Substrate, which is extremely exciting. We've talked about cross-chain governance, for instance, which has a really interesting use case in Substrate ecosystems, in particular Kusama and Polkadot. If you think about kind of protocol structure in Ethereum versus Kusama and Polkadot, there are potentially at least 2 additional levels of governance complexity that appear in Substrate, which may actually be like absolutely warranted when we're thinking about governance at a conceptual level. Kind of how should it work? Exactly what do I mean? So on Ethereum, you have Aave, which is built on obviously the underlying blockchain. In Kusama, you have Picasso, which is built on the underlying blockchain. But you also potentially have protocols built on Picasso and applications built on top of on top of those protocols or frameworks. So when Bribe looks at kind of the next set of tooling that is that's required to make governance work really well, in reality, it's not just one kind of vertical, if you will. It's not one entire vertical DAO that is making one decision a week that impacts all of these different communities, which obviously, kind of when we hear it put that way, doesn't sound very sustainable or very decentralized. But it actually looks a lot more like the steps that Aave is taking to decentralize its DAO structure into more and more decision-making bodies. So again, to recap, what are some of the interesting tools and frameworks that we see coming out here? Decentralized decision-making across layers of a protocol, decentralized DAOs. I think looking at V-Curve and staked Aave as liquid governance and staked voting archetypes respectively is really useful. I think calling out Y teams is definitely helpful in the way that kind of Yearn is trying to distribute permissions and decision-making power. We see a bunch of these different paradigms starting to emerge, which we can imagine would stitch themselves together into a more intuitive and more decentralized framework for how a DAO should actually work. In fact, I would almost aspire to say that we have all of the pieces conceptually at hand. We have them ready to be forked from efforts where they have worked before. That VEV was perhaps the last piece that was completely missing, and that, like we've said before, Bribe emerges at a really good time to kind of be a facilitator to stitch together these different novel features of governance into what really means or into what really looks like a DAO 2.0. We discussed this in Bribe has kind of a high level roadmap document which has been laid out. So plug for the great research that the team is doing there, and we'll continue to keep you all in the loop ongoing on our thinking about the roadmap and what those concrete steps to DAO 2.0 really look like.
Oh, yeah, thank you for that. That's I think that's going to leave most of us very bullish after that. And just to be conscious of time, if anybody would like to raise their hand now for questions, we'll move on to those after the next point. And Condorcet, I think it'd be great to kind of, as one of the last points, we've obviously already mentioned the MIM Aave proposal. So I think just to finally, really reiterate kind of how it will work on Bribe, if you could go through, the actual process for users locking tokens, and, if there's any Frog Nation whales listening to this, how might it actually look if they want to come and bribe that pool?
Yes, absolutely. We love MIM because it has these underlying use cases. I should have called it out in my last answer, actually. Just like Staked Aave, just like Curve, we love that it's a utility token, through and through, and we want it. We would love to see it integrated on Aave. So, happy to support it as the first proposal. And exactly how it will work is we have submitted the proposal to Aave Forum. In a week or two, the proposal will move over to Snapshot, at which point we'll start really hyping it up. There will be a period of snapshot voting, essentially. While it is not an absolute requirement that a proposal passes Snapshot, it's better if it does. In any case, we'll see what happens there. By the time the proposal has left Snapshot and has been submitted for on-chain voting, the Bribe app will have launched, and the proposal will show up on the Bribe application as open for bidding. Bidding will start at $1, something like this, whatever we set, but at a very small amount. At which point we hope that somebody will bid in order to ensure that the coalition can support the proposal. If there are any detractors amongst us, then of course we would expect to get some negative bids on the proposal as well. In any case, it'll become very clear from the application how bidding works and what the current bidding activity is. We've built a dashboard for kind of all of this information that I think is pretty fun and intuitive, actually. Again, part of our broader mission to make governance more accessible and intuitive for users. As a holder of Aave or a holder of Bribe, you may also participate in staking. Specifically, that means, of course, becoming a beneficiary from the bid, whether that bid is to support or deny the proposal. You'll stake your Aave or Bribe with, onto the front end, onto the same application. Again, should be pretty clear and intuitive how that's happening. You'll stake, both assets specifically into the Aave Bribe pool, of course, which itself is, kind of essentially its own DAO, its own protocol. And then you'll become a beneficiary of the bidding activity whenever the proposal actually executes, whenever the voting actually happens. you'll automatically vote on behalf of the highest bidder. That's, of course, the purpose of you staking with the protocol. Last thing to call out is that you will, we'll provide the link and everything to the Aave Bribe pool specifically so that you know kind of where that activity is happening and you're up to date on the timelines.
Awesome. Yeah. I can't wait to see how that goes. Like, great first one to see, Bribe in the wild. And I think, one of the final important things to mention before we go on to questions is that, the Bribe token hasn't actually launched yet. So for everybody listening that is now excited after all of this bullish news, there will be an LBP. No specific date yet. So I'm going to be annoying and just say soon. Follow all the channels, the Bribe official pages, and there will be notifications for that and all of the other first proposals very soon. Thank you, Condorcet and BrainJar, for both going through all of those questions. If we could now open up the floor to anybody that would like to raise their hand, and we can bring on some community questions. Choose. Hello.
Hello. Good evening or morning. Super interesting. I'm just curious, as people get more comfortable with VV and protocols like Convex and Bribe may appear in the same forum like Aave or Curve. So how would that dynamic play out? Would you bribe for people to bribe using Bribe protocol? Thanks.
That's a great question and very well worded, very appropriately worded. Of course, it always depends on the context. I.e., Convex, in particular, has Vodium, which is, obviously a bribe, in a sense, which is built on top of it. I think what I have said before, and I think my intuition on this one is that there is room for VEV utilities until we get to a point where it is very obvious the dollar value of voting in a certain manner at a certain time. So like when a curve gauge vote happens, there are like automated dashboards at this point that can tell me, if I vote in a certain place, how much am I going to get for my vote? And, basically how much is this worth to the protocols? Or as a proxy for how much is this worth to protocols which are competing for my vote. So I think the fact that Convex and Vodium have both allowed us to, the existence of both Convex and Vodium has allowed us to, get to that steady state in Curve where that marketplace is clear. So the reason, honestly, why Bribe doesn't have any intentions currently on, building a Curve Bribe mechanism is that I think that the market works. I think like our intentions, have been played out, and I think it's quite fine. But there will be room for actors in new ecosystems, until that market is set up. As a meta point. So given that, we honestly think of VEV as an integral part of DAO 2.0. Frankly speaking, there is no reason why new protocols can't have not just the V-curve model, but also a liquid governance marketplace, a utility for the vote, and a way to build coalitions around major decisions. There's no reason why that kind of internal framework can't just be ready off the shelf, as part of like an Aragon DAO, honestly. And that's like the point that we want to get to. I don't believe that in their current iteration, any of these Bribe protocols will exist into perpetuity, if you ask my honest opinion. However, there is still like obviously a space for governance utilities. There's still a marketplace, which is very important here. To me, this was kind of the fundamental rationale for how we've structured the protocol and the token. And the point here is to facilitate a protocol, or I think the angle here, our strategy is to facilitate ultimately a protocol agnostic framework, which I think honestly you'll probably start to see whispers of in other communities as well. Once we start talking about it, the point of protocol agnostic obviously is that, going all the way back to the beginning of our conversation, if the utility provided by Aave governance and the utility provided by Curve governance to a third-party protocol is relatively comparable, is to some extent interchangeable, then as a third-party protocol, I should integrate with whatever protocol is cheapest. Essentially with wherever, I've created another side to this market now. I should integrate with whatever protocol makes it the easiest for me to integrate with them. So in that sense, the ability for Bribe to continue to maintain large holdings and TVL, across protocols with a framework that helps for standing up new Bribe pools, incentivized and highly technical actors within the ecosystem who can advise on the creation of new Bribe pools, the easy integration to external marketplaces and exchanges, perhaps even the ability to list proposals for sale on the Bribe website if it becomes a highly trafficked kind of distribution method. All of these things start to become the real and permanent utilities that a governance company provides. And I don't think it's anybody's business model to necessarily do things like this right now. We're trying to build the future where it's possible.
Yeah, sounds great. So it's like the fundamental value comes from how easy you make governance for the voters, and that's how you get the most traffic. Yeah, super interesting. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Great question, and yeah, awesome answer. Thank you. Thank you both. If anybody else wants to ask a question, I think we have time for possibly one more. Okay, on that note, yeah, it'd be great to kind of have some closing remarks. I think we've gone through a lot. I think it's clear, the value proposition of Bribe, and I'm already getting plenty of DMs saying, how hasn't this been done before? It seems so obvious. Yeah. So I think a lot of people are now excited, especially as, like you say, right, that this is purely just the beginning, and it opens up the door to significant opportunities, especially with Picasso and everything else we're doing in the composable ecosystem. Yeah, so personally, yeah, super excited. So yeah, it'd be great to just have some final remarks from yourself, Condorcet, and also you, Brainjar.
Yeah, I mean, I've been talking a while. I think watch the LBP and the mainnet launch. We're always looking for feedback, and honestly, if you're still listening, maybe this is you, but you can tell, I think, how passionate myself and the team at Composable, the entire ecosystem that we're building here, you can tell how passionate we are about governance, not just working for us and our protocols, but working generally at a conceptual level. And it's because we think, in very long terms, with long horizons about the role of government and kind of finance, and making sure that it's helping to set DeFi up, that it's working in a way where DeFi can really kind of expand rapidly around the globe, and apply to more and more contexts, kind of outside of just the web. So huge ambitions here. Very happy to have you all along for the ride, and definitely don't hesitate to reach out if you want to be part of the journey. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And yeah, looking forward to hearing from you again, Condorcet. Very beautifully said. And
I'll be back.
I hope so. With more alpha as well. Brainjar, if you could add your final remarks.
Enough said.
That's exactly. It doesn't need to say.
No, sorry, no, I was having difficulty hearing. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's very clear how important to us Bribe is as a primitive. Also, I think there's just going to be a lot of like common good stuff that comes out of the cross-chain governance stuff, as well as the. So I think I'm personally very excited about, from a technical standpoint, how Bribe will push the ecosystem forward. And yeah, I mean, I think the applications are pretty much endless, and I really encourage you all to get involved with this Aave proposal. It gives a brand new use case as well for staked Aave, which I know Stani tweeted about like in July. And I think this is a prime use case of that. And that really is just like a 1/100th of all the stuff that's actually going on with respect to Bribe. So big respect for the Bribe team, and here to support them going forward.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you both once again. And obviously, thank you to everybody that's listened tonight. I'm sure we're going to have another follow-up AMA very soon for the million things that we're doing at Composable. So yeah, thank you all for listening, and we'll speak to you again soon. Cheers, guys.